We certainly keep the door wide open for that kind of management, should it come and arise from something like the plans that we just were introduced to. That would be a good base to work off of. So on Monday at our commission meeting, we voted, or the commission voted, to pledge part of that 30%. The land bank would be part of the group to help get that first plan done. And then, you know, the way I look at it is that we have places all over the island. My assumption is that this plan would allow us to overlay, here's Ripley's, here's Wiscosam's, and then be able to strategically say, this is where we should go, this is what we should do, and this is how we should focus that effort. So we're here to collaborate, and yeah, glad to learn what I've learned tonight. And we'll certainly be a resource and part of the team as we move forward.
Do we have other questions?
Bill Straw from Tisbury. To the land bank people then, would you be posting something on your website to keep us apprised of how your progress is going?
You're welcome to come to every Monday. We have a meeting. If that gains traction, that's something we often do post bulletins right at the top of the webpage. We do have Facebook. If this is something that the conversation needs to be out there and people are curious, they're certainly coming to that public meeting every Monday. And that could be the conversation that says we feel like we need to have a more direct line of communication. But I think we would be part of a group of people taking part in this. And hopefully as a group we would have a nice direct way of communicating with interested and collaborating parties.
Thank you. Just one other question. I wonder from the fire chiefs here if they would support an island-wide change in building codes to put forth an initiative to change all the roofs to metal.
Pass this right over to the building inspector that we have in the room.
So that is a building code issue, not a fire department issue if we're changing code. I don't think that that's a realistic thing to expect in the near future.
Unacceptable.
Sue Ruby. I don't know who manages the Woods property, but I would, oh, thank you. I don't know who manages the Woods property, but if there's somebody here who can explain to me what kind of fire risk that has. It's nothing but a bunch of dead wood sitting between Middle Road, North Road, up to West Cosins. And I just live in fear that that thing's going to catch on fire. People have said, no, you don't have to worry about it, it's all rotted, it's not, you know, it's not a fire hazard. I have a hard time believing it's not a fire hazard. And what are we doing about it? Is this one of those head in the sand issues?
They said it's the Nature Conservancy, but there's nobody here from the Nature Conservancy tonight.
Does anybody here have an assessment of that property?
I won't say an assessment, but it has been a property that we have worked on about 5 or 6 years ago. We did do some prescribed burns in some strategic areas of that property to make it a little bit safer in case of wildfire. Again, in that strategic northwest corner, in case of a building. And I do know there is plans, and that will be more of an issue with TNC and some of their other goals for their properties. Primary access. And the primary access to be able to get in there with those. And again, when we get the CWP done for the island, it's really going to give us that laser vision where we need to really focus our energies and have that quantified fire danger.
And I know listening to one of the fire chiefs talking tonight saying that, you know, they couldn't get to a particular house because there was a tree in the driveway, pretty close to the driveway, blocking a truck from coming through. They warned the property owner multiple times, and finally the house burned down. And when they had to bring a company in to take apart the house, the tree had to come down so they could get the dumpster in. So if you have anything blocking access to our fire departments getting to your property, I would consider doing something about that, or your neighbors. If you see any of your neighbors with limited access, not only will it affect them, but it will affect us, their neighbors. If their house is going up, the fire department can't reach them. We're the next one next to that neighbor. So this is where we all have to be involved with our community.
I'm just curious if there is a concrete timeline for coming together with a plan, and if there is an actual collaborative working group yet, or just a lot of people sitting in the room.
Well, I know, okay, good.
So we're working hard on that plan. We've applied, MEMA has passed it on to FEMA for them to approve it for the funding. So a lot of the decisions that need to be made are based off of actual data, right? So we have some educated decisions to be made. We do have the hazard mitigation plan, as Joanne had spoke to, from 2015 that outlines the higher risk areas. We have monthly meetings with emergency managers as well, and we're all working towards public safety as a whole, but certainly wildfire management is part of that. So we are making strides to improve the conditions across the island. But the big missing piece was how to best handle the various fuels in the various areas. So that missing piece was that plan that we've been discussing tonight.
So a follow-up question on that, Bob Laskowski here, and this is wonderful to hear. So, okay, a follow-up question to the gentleman who was just speaking. That sounds great to have a plan there. The sense that I have is that there's lots of local jurisdictions of various sorts, of conservation groups and towns and whatnot. Does that plan that you're talking about address that issue of what seems to me to be balkanization of what one person does this, one person does that? Is it meant to address that issue so there's a systematic approach for the community as a whole? We have this one slide, one island, and we've got no place to go. Talking about evacuation plans, where are you going to go here? So it seems to me a comprehensive approach is what we need to get over some of this jurisdictional stuff that plagues us with many of our issues.
One of the great things about the plan is that it doesn't have town lines, it doesn't have property lines, it has no care as to where ownership is. Its focus is specifically about the fuels and what to do about those. So once the plan is complete, we can overlay that map with the actual property lines and address it with the property owners as best we can. One thing that I think that we should also discuss tonight, we have Chief Salino in the room, and as we're talking about mitigation for fuels and things, can you possibly enlighten us a little bit about the difference between prescribed fires and or mechanical mitigation efforts?
You bet. So for those, how many folks have seen us burning on the island? How many folks have seen the dirty, rotten burn crew on the ferry on the way back, trying to mix with the tourists that come over here? That always makes me sometimes more nervous than the burn operation itself. But we do pretty well, and so I'm going to lead off by saying hats off to the community. We started doing this. Aaron could attest to this. Is that it was the wreck as soon as that Memorial Day ferry arrived, right through Labor Day, we were off limits. We didn't come over and burn, and that was out of respect for the chiefs and you folks and what you put up with during the summer wreck season here. And now in 2016, I had some of your residents asking us, boy, we didn't see you over here burning. When are you coming back to kill our ticks? And that was fun to answer that. We probably do kill ticks. I don't know if we have that much of an impact on it. But what it told me was that we had become part of your culture and starting to become part of your culture as a burn crew. So that told me that the community started to get used to us working and putting fire back in the landscape towards those goals that we put up on the screen. And that's a huge step, right? That's huge. One of the things that they face across the country, Missoula, Montana is a good example. I met out there back in the summer, and I was shocked to find out that they burned 120 acres in Missoula last year, and they were pretty proud of that. That was the most they had burned in any season in 20 years. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me, this is Missoula, right? I mean, they have a problem there. And the problem was they couldn't get the collaboration amongst the partners like we have here. And we're approaching 2,000 acres this year of treated fuels with prescribed fire on non-federal lands. That's huge for a little state that could, like Massachusetts. Question is the difference between mechanical and burning. And so there's two approaches. Some of you've seen the fuel types, the fuel conditions in the Corella State Forest, say Pahogana, for instance, or over in West Tisbury, over on a triangle there that sits in the corner. When we approached those units hadn't seen fire in some cases in over 65 years. And so the fuel loading is huge. And so it would be unsafe and irresponsible for us to go in there and think that we can start mitigating that condition and lowering the hazardous fuel condition simply by using prescribed fire. We had to mix the tactics, and we combined mechanical treatments with followed up by prescribed fire. And so there's trade-offs to both. So we mowed an entire unit on the West Tisbury side, 210 acres. That totally changed the fire behavior in that unit. We mowed the scrub oak down, and here's the fuel loading. Fuel loading has a lot to do with the fire behavior. The fuel loading in that scrub oak model is roughly, I'm going to get away from the speaker, is roughly about 7 to 10 tons to the acre, right? So when we burn it, we consume that fuel, a big percentage of it. If we burn it on the right day, under the right, what we call prescription, then our objective is to consume that fuel like fire would naturally do. When we mow it, we're not consuming that fuel. That 7 to 10 tons to the acre is still there on the landscape. It's just in a different form. It's in a different form. It's laid down on the ground. And what we've learned in our experience burning over here and in Miles Standish and a few other places is that that works, and we'll go through and burn some of those. We call that mastication. When we mow it, we'll go in and mow those areas, and in these sandy soils, a lot of that masticated material is now not taking up moisture and fuel, so it's just going to dry and cure there in the sun. It doesn't rot as easy as you think. It takes a lot longer in sandy, arid soils. And when we burn it, we get some very intense BTUs and fire behavior coming off of those units. We may not get the 35-foot flame wings, but we get some pretty erratic heat and fire behavior. And so, you know, that's one of the trade-offs, sort of one of the negatives of trying to just use mechanical. And then if we continuously use mechanical, what happens is we build up a mulch layer. And ultimately, we'll probably get a fire on that landscape, right? And that mulch layer is now there on the duff and becomes, during the summer, dry summer months, baked in the sun, becomes what we call available and receptive to burn. And now the fire department faces, you know, a 10-acre ground fire or a duff fire which produces smoke and is really, really challenging to try to extinguish, and at some point it escapes, right, and gets into those flashy fuels. So the prescribed fire part of it, the benefit is we consume the fuels. The challenge is that it's a risky business. So there's risk to it. There's risk in terms of controlling the fire first, right? That's our number one objective. Well, second objective. First is the safety of our crew and the firefighters. And then it's making sure that we don't get that fire outside our planned objective area. And then we face managing smoke. So you'll notice, and you've probably, any of you that have followed us, we've had numerous times where we're planning to burn, and Aaron, the burn boss in the back, will send out a notice maybe 3 or 4 days ahead, and then it comes down to a 24-hour notice, and then 6 hours ahead of time, or even 2 or 3 hours ahead of time, we cancel the burn. Why? Because the atmospheric condition, the weather conditions are such that we can't vent the smoke, or we're going to impact one of your subdivisions are one of the smoke receptors, and we just don't want to do that. So, so that's challenging for us, but when it comes together, the prescribed fire part of it is we're putting that natural tool back into the system and actually restoring that balance that fire always played across that, that system long before we stepped foot on the ground, right? And so we know that's that whole thing about cohesive strategy is fire resilient landscapes. So next time, some of our successes were we were able to finally complete about, Aaron, was it little over 300 acres across the central part of Pahogana. And so the Edgartown Fire Department now has a burn unit that we burned and now has a buffer of 300 acres across that section of the state forest where the fuel loading has been significantly reduced. Will it burn? Absolutely. It'll carry fire through there. We were out there earlier this year, and it'll carry fire, but it's going to carry a fire behavior that the chief can handle, right? We're not going to get the 40-foot flame lengths that's going to come across Edgartown West Coastbury Road like it's not even there. That's the idea behind that. Then we get into the cycle. One of the things we're always learning. So one of the things we got to learn is when do we come back into the unit? What's our return interval, we call it? And we're starting to figure that out. The northeast corner up by Dodger's Hole that we showed on the map, we actually we went and did our first re-entry, and it was roughly about 6 or 7 years. And we went back in there and we burned it, and we burned the entire 110 acres in one day instead of chunking it out, putting smoke in the air, trying to, get the thing to, getting it burned with those hazardous fuel conditions. Does that answer your question, Chief?
I just want to quickly piggyback off question I got just a second ago. I think the other really important thing about the CWBP, it is going to be the same sheet of music that we're going to be all playing off of. As of right now, not saying we're all doing our own things, but this is going to bring us together, and we're going to have that clear vision.
Hi, my name's Chris, and I am one of those people in Dodger's Hole next to the state forest. And I've heard from a couple of different avenues that the state forest, when it burned a long time ago, they replaced the trees with pine trees that really perhaps weren't the best choice, and now they're aging out, and a lot of them, as part of their natural life cycle, are dying, which, that happens. Is there any kind of plan with the state forest to deal with this? And where are we in the arc of a vast number of the spruces and evergreens and their dying off as part of this project that was started a long time ago?
That's a good question. And so those trees that they replaced with, it sounded like a great idea at the time. Most of them were red pine. And so it was a great reforestation tree that they used going back in the 30s. And we see that all across the state. The problem is red pine's not native. It's not a native species to this area. The southern range of it is right up on the southern New Hampshire border, and it's certainly not native to sandy soils. So we actually just removed almost 500 acres of dying and dead red pine out of Miles Standish. So it acquired a disease. Once it becomes susceptible, once it gets to a certain age, a lot of those stands they planted and never thinned them, so they never kept them really healthy and viable. And so diplodia, the disease, gets into the stand, and that gets followed by a secondary, which was red pine scale, the insect part of it, and that's what puts the nail in the coffin, if you will, on those. And so we've worked, a lot of our federal funding in the last, 2010 through 15 or so, has been removing the dead red pine from the state forest. Now there's some other non-native species in there, like the Norway spruces, that seem to do really well. There was a lot of conversation, not so much revolving around the fire issue, as to whether, they keep the spruce stands in there just for variability. The spruces don't tend to regenerate and spread, so they stick to that. Although we did have white spruce that was introduced, and that actually did regenerate, especially in the cold bottoms on the south side of the island. And so we try to remove those non-native species that are going to try to take over the site. But the red pine is the one you're thinking of. There's almost none alive anymore here on the island, yeah.
Can I jump in here? Yeah? Another Chris. So, let me just take it back a little further. Martha's Vineyard 100 years ago didn't have many trees. It was pretty much an open plain, and very few people do. We've caused the problems that we're looking at today, and we can fix them. And it's a political fix. And in answer to your question about the politics of firefighting, we have an incredible team of firemen on this island. They're totally collaborative. They do mutual aid, mutual support, mutual training. Every piece of it works really well. They determine the equipment they buy based on what the other departments have. That's a good system. But the problem is, it's a reactive system. We're fighting, it's just like the Army. We're always looking at the last war instead of the next war. When the state forest was started, it wasn't a state forest, it was a heathland reservation. And it was mostly fields and farms. And it's grown up in 100 years to be the forest that we know today. When I was a volunteer fireman as a teenager, you could drive a big brush breaker through almost all of it. You had to dodge the big trees. You can't do that today. We need a new plan. And in answer to the poor building inspector, it's not a building inspector's problem, it's a town problem. You can change those rules anytime you want. You go to town meeting, you pass a bylaw that says you can't use cedar shingles, or you have to use a metal roof, or whatever it is you want. Stick to the politicians, stick to the town selectmen. The firemen work for us, but they're reactive. You have to keep remembering that. What you're hearing today is a proactive program, but it's small. The young lady who spoke over there about the woods property, 500 acres of dying oak trees, is right on. The Polly Hill people, when I call them about exactly the same problem, because my sister here pointed out that it's like a big dry arrow pointed at our houses, they said, no, we don't want to cut out that dead wood. This is part of the process of regeneration. You let it die, it'll grow better. I'm not sure I buy all that, but what makes me feel better is the idea of creating fire lanes, access to as much of it as possible, and we're working on that. I look at the fire lanes in the state forest and they seem very insufficient to me. When my father-in-law was a young man, he spent his summers plowing those fire lanes to make sure that fires couldn't jump across them. Here we are today with it sort of curling in on the top, and I know, and the firemen here in the room know, that when the fire is in the top of the trees, it's going to jump right over those fire lanes like they weren't even there. We need more. So, not the firemen in the room, they're already doing a lot. But the rest of us have an obligation to go back to our town meetings, to our selectmen, our planning boards, and demand more. And not put it on the building inspectors or the firemen. They'll do what they're asked to do, and they always have, and more. But we need to ask the right questions, and the selectmen are really where you need to take this to.
Hi, this is Marty Moran. What I'd like to do is leave here with a plan. Take that whiteboard and start talking about priorities and things that we could do so that, as Chris is saying, we can ask questions, but I think I would like to leave here with some sort of a sense of what happens next. And I agree, we shouldn't just be asking the fire chiefs to be doing this. We're here we're interested, we're bright, we can come up with ideas about what to do next. So I'd like to think about that now.
Bob Woodruff. I'm founder and chairman, co-chairman of the Friends of Corella State Forest, a little nonprofit we formed a couple of years ago to help give a little muscle for Chris Bruno, the superintendent here, and Josh Nigro, and all these other fellows who are working on the fire control, burning, and so forth. What I would suggest that we do is to meet in this room each month for the next 3 or 4 months and see what we can put together. So before we leave here tonight, we might decide on a meeting date and maybe a couple of people to try to put together an agenda.
Well, sounds good to me. Moving forward, I'd like to ask if one of the fire chiefs would like to make a recommendation to us what we can do best to help you.
I think taking advantage of some of the programs that are out there already. We heard some of our DCR representatives talk about the Firewise program, having homes assessed. That's a great start for individual people to step out there and take a look at their own individual homes. And that can grow. That's the seeds that will be planted into larger communities, and neighbors will be asking what you're doing. And I think that's a great way to start. Everybody taking a look at what they have at home. I can tell you that for the fire departments, we've been improving the diversity of assets available across the entire island. In all of our efforts, we talked about how we're all doing different things in different areas. But as the gentleman over there said, we're so dependent on mutual aid that anything a neighboring community does, it affects us positively because it reduces the risk to our firefighters, and it also protects them, it protects the community that it's within. But anything that we're doing in our own areas, because we're so dependent on mutual aid, is a positive thing. So we are putting our heads together, trying to come up with the best ways to do that. We're taking advantage of assets as well. DCR is working to try and get us a surplus vehicle down here to provide some water, much needed water throughout the state forest in an all-wheel drive capacity. That's, again, an asset that would be available across the island. So we've had great success in Edgartown, partnering up with DCR for the Pognet area, different areas. We've seen some good success in the Nature Conservancy areas with Joel Carlson working to mitigate some fuels for us in our containment airfield area. So continued partnerships with them to mitigate the fuels over long term. I think all of those things are things that we should be doing prioritizing wise. So I think, again, just working together, this collaborative effort is huge because we are working hard, but you stepping up here in the room tonight to have a discussion about this is a huge part of us all working together, so I appreciate that. Those are just some of the ideas off the top of my head that I can think of.
Make sure that you leave your information. What we'll try to do is set up some times that we can meet, and we'll contact you through email. So the more that we hear from you, the better.
Tell your selectmen to come.
Which is a good thing. I think I talked to two of my 3 selectmen today, and they're not here. One I know is, oh, I'm sorry. Yay, she's here. I didn't see. Thank you so much. We've sent out information to all the selectmen